right, namaste everyone. Namaste. I am a Hindu. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true.
Ano bhadraha kritave yantu vishwataha. Let noble thoughts come to us from all sides.
All of us have to be taught that we are Hindus, to whatever denomination we may belong. We have certain common ideas, certain common goals behind us, and now the time has come for us to stand up, for the well-being of ourselves, for the well-being of our race. We must give up our little quarrels and differences.
The term Hindu was a geographical identity. By what logic has the majority convinced themselves it fits into the confines of the word religion? Was and is the narrative ever truly in the hands of those it supposedly represents?
Namaste, and welcome to National Hindu Student Forum UK and Vichaar Manthan's first joint collaborative event, Vichaar Manthan on campus. It is a privilege for us to see so much support and interest. So thank you so much for joining us in this journey from different parts of the city and different parts of the country. We heard our 4 hosting chapters this evening: KCL, Queen Mary, Imperial, and LSC, come up with their thought for identity. And I would now like to call Drishti May, the National President of National Hindu Students Forum UK, to share her thoughts.
Namaste, everyone. Because you responded, I'm going to try that once more. Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted and filled with pride to stand here today on behalf of the National Hindu Students Forum. Today, as Acharya mentioned, is the first ever collaboration between Vichaar Manthan and the National Hindu Students Forum. And I'd like to take a minute just to tell you a bit about NHSF, or National Hindu Students Forum. Founded over 27 years ago, our aim over the years has remained unchanged. And that is, across all campuses across the UK, to preserve, protect, practice, and promote Hindu Dharma. Now, I said at the very start, I'm really filled with pride today. And the reason for that is that this is a landmark event, or this is the start of something new in the consciousness of not just the youth, but also for our Samaj. NHSF is a space where we can come together, not only as a home away from home, a safe space where we can find people with shared values or similar beliefs or similar views, but also to explore, discuss, and engage in earnest discussions. Questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Are really prevalent or really common whilst we're at university. And these are our formative years where we start to ask, what is a Hindu? Who is a Hindu? How am I Hindu? Am I a bad Hindu? These are all really common questions. And today is important, or this event is important, because we've gone from questioning internally to having a manthan about it. We're saying, not only is this an important question, but we care, and we want to introduce it into the common narrative. It's not something that's confined just to my Hindu society. It's not something that's just confined to the mandir. It's something that I will discuss with my peers. It is something that I will discuss and explore proudly, earnestly. The idea for this event started possibly 2 years ago as just an idea. And I think maybe late last summer, we started talking to some students about it, and it caught like fire. And over the last few months, so many people and so many students have worked hard to make today possible with, a lovely panel of speakers, an amazing organization to partner with. I'm absolutely delighted and filled with pride, and I hope that you too will enjoy this evening, enjoy the discussion, but also that you will walk away with some food for thought, some questions answered, but many more to explore after this event. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Drishti. Drishti beautifully highlighted the purpose that brings us all here today in this journey. And this journey is just a start. So I'd like to take a few moments to talk about our collaborative partner this evening, Vichaar Manthan. Vichaar Manthan is an independent voluntary organization that engages with members of the society and institutions. We come from a vibrant civilization that explores landscapes in the realms of economics, politics, arts. And as British members of the British society today, we have many issues. And Vichaar Manthan aims to explore some of these issues through the dharmic lens, drawing in from generations of solutions that we have picked up through the ages of Ramayana, Mahabharata, and so much more. Vichaar Manthan is about deepening our understanding. It does not engage in debate, but aims to broaden our perspective and sometimes broaden our narrative. The title and the purpose of Vichaar Manthan on campus today is for us as tomorrow's leaders to explore some of the issues that affect our sphere of society and how we can explore solutions to those through the Hindu lens. The first Vichaar Manthan on campus is titled Cows, Curry, and Caste. I grew up in 3 different countries, and every time people heard the word Hindu, without fail, I would get asked, "Oh, so you worship cows? Do you speak the language Hindu?" I love a good curry. And from the laughter, I can see that I'm not the only one who shares this sentiment. So in a world today where self-perception plays such a key role in our flourishing, how can we define what makes us Hindu? And following that, how can we grasp the narrative and shape the world around us? I would now like to take a few moments to introduce our chair this evening, Ravi Lakhani. Raviji Lakhani is a graduate from Leicester and is the part of the National Vichaar Manthan team. For all of you who have tuned into Vichaar Manthan before, you must have seen Raviji chair many discussions. So I assure you, tonight, you're in safe hands.
Thank you very much. I'll just give you a brief overview of what's going to happen this evening. We will have opening statements, then a panel discussion, and then you will have a chance to directly question all of our wonderful speakers today. On my right, we have Hindol Sengupta. Looks like he's just woken up.
Yes. It's called my deep meditative,
Absolutely.
stupor into the ironies of dharma and so on and so forth.
Lovely. So he's an award-winning author. He's written 9 books, and he's just told me he's working on another one. He's won the Wilbur Award for being Hindu, which was a book that he wrote. That was one of the first books on Hinduism to win that prestigious prize. He's been a journalist at the Indian editions of Fortune magazine, Bloomberg, CNBC, and CNN. And he's currently editor-at-large of Fortune India. He's a Knight Bhagat Fellow at Columbia University and a Chevening Scholar at the University of Oxford. He's also a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. So that's Hindolji. To his right, absolutely. To his right, we have Dr. Sachinji Nandha, who some of you may be familiar with. So Dr. Nandha is the CEO of Pillbox Capital, a private equity fund. He read Christian and Islamic theology at postgraduate level and pursued his interests in liberty and identity formation at Nottingham University. Sachin is the co-author of a paper entitled Who is a Hindu? And he co-authored it with Acharya Vidyabhaskarji, who will join us very shortly. Yeah? Vidyabhaskarji, whose face you will see towering above us here, is joining us from Switzerland. Okay, he is an ordained Acharya and a scholar of Sanskrit. He spent the age of 12 to 19 studying Sanskrit at Kailash Ashram in Rishikesh, prior to returning to Switzerland to pursue academic studies in comparative religion. So he's very familiar with the basis of our topic today. He's also completed a master's program in comparative religion, where his thesis was on the idea of dharma in the Rig Veda. He's a very serious scholar, and he spends most of his time translating classical and ancient texts. So he will be our scriptural authority for today. And as I said, he lives in Switzerland.
So, namaste everybody, Hari Om. We have a short 5-minute monologue, I was told, to answer the question, who is a Hindu? And it's a difficult question on the one hand, and it's an easy question on the other hand. I think the easiest formula, and now Sachin Bhai can't contradict me, so the easiest formula is, I believe, anyone who genuinely loves India is a Hindu, Bharat. I think that would be the easiest formula to work with. Who genuinely loves Bharat. Why? Because the more complex formula is Hindu is a person who feels an affinity to the religious, philosophical, ethical, and contemplative traditions that have their roots in India, in Bharat, that have emerged from the soil of Bharat, the subcontinent. I think that is a more complex definition. And therefore, anyone who truly loves Bharat will have that affinity with what has emerged from Bharat. So I think that is one of the easiest definitions of who is a Hindu. And it fits in all the different categories in an integrated way, because as we all know, the Hindu Dharma is so vast that it can accommodate atheists, it can accommodate people who do not believe in a deity or in a god or a supreme being. There have been, as you probably know, or not, maybe not everybody is aware of that, there have been traditions within the philosophical schools of Sankhya, for example, which is one of the 6 darshanas, that have denied Ishvara, a supreme being, that have said there is no necessity for Ishvara, there is no necessity for a supreme being, and yet nobody would say that these traditions are not Hindu. So everyone has a place as long as it is a tradition that emerged from Bharat. I think that is the primary definition that we have to stick to. I think if we remove that, if we say one can be a Hindu and it's not related to Bharat, I think that's where it doesn't work. So that's to answer the question, who is not a Hindu, would be a person who doesn't have that affinity with a tradition that emerged from Bharat. So I think that's where it really works. So is it purely geographical? No, of course not. I didn't grow up in Bharat before the age of 12. I'm not biologically or genetically from Bharat, and yet my whole inner being, my way of thinking, my belief, existential convictions are all related to something that has emerged from Bharat. So I know we don't have much time. Another aspect is continuity. In the 14th century, we had a scholar called Acharya, who wrote a commentary on the 4 Vedas, especially the Rig Veda, And that commentary is so impeccable, so precise, that Indologists up to, today, if they want to understand a particular terminology in a Vedic mantra, in a Vedic verse, they have to look at what Acharya wrote and how he explained the verse, because it is so perfect, also historically, linguistically. Now the question is, how is it possible that somebody in the 14th century, that's only 600 years ago, was able to write a commentary on something that was written 3,400 years before his time, minimum, maybe much older? The explanation is continuity. And that continuity is related to identity. So I think if we have continuity of scholarship, of practices, of knowledge, then we can say Hindu Dharma is alive. And it is in its pure form, it's still being lived. So thank you very much, and I look forward to questions and interaction.
I think a great overview and a basis for the rest of our talk to be framed within what Acharya Vidyabhaskarji just said. So Sachinji, your opening remarks for 5 minutes.
Who is a Hindu? In order to summarize it, I would say there are 3 core criteria. Okay? One is anybody, anywhere, who is participating in their lives cognitively with traditions that are what we would broadly call, as Vidyabhaskarji said, from Bharat. So those who are practicing yoga, but not just the asanas, that's very sort of bland, but through yoga, if somebody is practicing the philosophy, the lifestyle, ahimsa, they're exploring consciousness, they're exploring their own emotions, through certain techniques that are rooted in the tradition, in the culture, they are, I would argue and say, whether they know it or not, whether they carry the identity or not, are actually practicing Hindu Dharma in some real sense. The second thing is that psychologically, Hindus are incredibly plural. So what do I mean by plural? I mean that the Hindu has the mental, psychological flexibility to adjust, adapt to any situation, environment in which they exist. For example, the Hindu mind, the cultural mind, has no issues with walking into any place of worship, anywhere, in any language, and they will be able to adapt. They'll be able to see the sanctity of the other. They'll be able to understand that there is something spiritual or there may be something special about the other. That kind of plurality is incredibly unique. And I would argue that in the 21st century, where identity politics and narrowing definitions and identities take place, and then, society forces us to polarize ourselves and belong to certain slots, Hindu Dharma offers a contrasting view to that, to actually say that we can be truly plural. And I can explore plurality a little bit later with you. The third thing is, as Vidyabhaskarji rightly said, some connection to ancient India, which he called Bharat, right? So some connection to ancient India. What do I mean by that? I don't mean you have to be Indian. Of course not. The Hindu identity has definitely transgressed race. So hence that quote was interesting at the beginning. Race, ethnicity, language, all of that. By the and the evidence is actually in the global society. There are people who are not Indian, but who are experiencing themselves and the universe through a Hindu lens. There's no doubt about that. But yet they will have some connection to ancient India, to India as it is today, in the sense that they will recognize that some of these traditions, philosophies, practices, lifestyles, values stem from that land. And it's rooted in that land. So let me just quickly, again, flip it and say, well, what is not Hindu? Hindu is not a religion. Why is it not a religion? Because there are simply no binding beliefs that underpin the Hindu identity. There is not a single belief that binds Hindus together. It is not a belief system. It has belief systems. So the Hindu tradition has many, many religions within it, right? And I'm going to argue that Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Vaishnavism, Shaivitism, these are all religious movements within the greatest sphere that is the Hindu tradition. And that is important to understand, that the Hindu culture is not built on a single belief system. Therefore, it is not a religion. And of course, thereby, it is also a space, as Vidyabhaskarji rightly alluded to, for non-Indians, but also theists and atheists. And actually, the terms theists and atheists does not actually make any sense within the Hindu tradition, which we can explore later on.
10 seconds. Done. Lovely. Even better.
Thank you. So let me begin by agreeing and by disagreeing, as
Lovely.
Hindus usually do. What is a Hindu? Well, I think there are only three questions that are important, at least I believe there are only three questions that are important in the Hindu imagination. And what are those three questions? Well, those three questions are, who am I, what do I want, and what is my purpose? Sadly for all of you, and certainly for me, most of us are going to be stuck only in question one for most of our lives. Swami Vivekananda reached question 3. Ramakrishna Paramahansa, his great guru, perhaps exceeded even question 3, right? We're all going to be stuck in three questions. Who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose? And those are the only three questions I would put to you that matter in the Hindu worldview. And there is a difference, and I disagree that Hinduism is not a religion, because what matters is, how do you define what is a religion? If I define, and what is a religion then? You might ask, what is a religion? Well, a religion is actually a very simple thing. Once you have bought all the iPhones that you could ever buy, and you have dated everybody you wanted to date, and you have done everybody you wanted to do, and bought everything that you wanted to buy, at the end of it all, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of it all, you will begin to ask yourself, what did it all mean? What did it all count for? The moment you begin to ask that question is really a question about meaning. What has my life amounted to? What does it all mean? What on earth did I do or am I doing? All religion is concerned with only that question. What does it all mean? Right? When you ask that question, there are only two conceivable answers. One says there is a question, the question that you're asking, that has an answer outside you. That answer could be in a book, in a movement, in a person, in a geographical location, in a physical structure. It could be anywhere outside you. That's one answer. The second answer is, the only place you will find the answer to what does it all mean is an internal place. It lies within you. The answer is contained within you. And if you understand that the only place you could find the answer to the question, what on earth does this all mean, lies within you, then you're a Hindu. It's a simple, straightforward answer. Life has only one meaning. Whatever that meaning is, I don't know. You have to discover it for yourself. When you ask yourself that question, you can only find two answers. One an external answer, one an internal answer. If that answer for you is inside, it's an internal answer, then you're a Hindu. Because that's the Hindu worldview. Many of you may not have, and I urge you to Google this, many of you may not have heard this, but when I was growing up, there was this wonderful serial on TV called Bharat Ek Khoj, The Search for India. Well, it was really taken from Jawaharlal Nehru's The Discovery of India. Shyam Benegal made that serial. If you go and Google that serial, the opening credits of that serial, a song plays in the opening credits of that serial. Now, when you listen to that song, the song says, Srishti se pehle sat nahi tha, asat bhi nahi. In the beginning, there was neither truth nor untruth. Now, of course, many of you won't know that that is really the Hindi translation of what you would call, or what we know as, the Nasadya Sukta. Now, the Nasadya Sukta is really the origin hymn, right? And we'll go into what an origin hymn means in a little while, but it is the origin hymn of the Rig Veda. It talks about where everything comes from. Now, the Nasadya Sukta, when you read it, you'll realize that it goes into what we call neti neti, not this in the beginning. What was there? Well, this was not there, and this was not there either, right? At the end of the Nasadya Sukta, there is a question, well, if in the beginning, it was neither this nor that, and neither this nor that, and neither this nor that, what was there in the beginning? It's a very interesting question. Well, the answer the Nasadya Sukta gives is, well, maybe he knows. And of course, when I say he here, I also mean she. Maybe he or she knows. Maybe whoever the one knows, right? But the last line of the Nasadya Sukta is the classic Hindu googly. You know, why is it a googly? Because the last line of the Nasadya Sukta says, well, but maybe even he or she or the one does not know. Because where is the truth? It is within you. Even the one might not know. Because the Nasadya Sukta says, even God was created, or gods were created later. So that's my answer to who's a Hindu. Thank you.
Keep it. Wonderful. Nice to have a panel that starts on opposite sides of the fence. Now I'm going to ask you to pull out your phones. We're going to take a brief respite. It's a lot of information to take in. I ask you to take out your phones and type this into your phone. So you just go on slido.do. So just go into that website, and it will ask you to enter a code. Okay? I'm going to go relatively quick because you're all young. So. And then that's the code you enter, U502. So we're going to throw up some questions, and you've had a proverbial wall of information thrown at you. If you could ignore that for the duration of answering these questions, and answer them as if you had just walked into this lecture theatre and what your paradigm was, or what your ideas were at that point. Okay? So we'll throw up question 1. Is it correct to identify Hindu as a religious identity? There you go. Jump on to the next question. Can non-Indians be Hindus? Okay, thank you very much. If you can now put all your phones away. You will need them at the end when we give out all your answers and embarrass you all. No, I'm joking. Okay, so I'm going to pick up on the most salient point, which is your idea that Hinduism is a religion. Okay, so let's start with you, because he's thrown the gauntlet down. Please define what a religion is and why you think Hinduism does not fit that definition.
Sure. So I firstly have a big problem with even the term Hinduism. I really have a big problem with it, which is why you never hear me use it. So that's the first thing. But what is a religion? Having studied Christianity and Islam, I can tell you that a religion is a institutionalized belief system with a hierarchy. It is an institutionalized belief system with a hierarchy. And therefore, there are holy books, there are sacred places, there are pilgrimages, there is an intermediary between you as the devotee or the herd and God, truth, whatever, and that's called the clergy. And I've just used a very much a Christian lexicon, but you can quite easily convert that into an Indian lexicon and just think about the Swaminarayan Sampradaya. Think about the ISKCON Sampradaya. These Sampradayas are religious movements within the Hindu tradition. But it would be wrong to say that Swaminarayanism represents Hindu Dharma. It doesn't. It represents a part of it. The Hare Krishna movement is a religious movement with a hierarchy, with places of worship, with clergy, all the rest of it. But it represents a portion of Hindu tradition, not the Hindu tradition. And therefore my contention to you is that that is a religion. Hindu tradition is a cultural movement, a civilizational movement. And that's why I have a problem with Hindu being affiliated and pigeonholed as a religion of the East.
Okay. Well, Hindolji, would you like to come in on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well,
Super keen.
sure. I mean, I'm happy to buy all of these things. See, it entirely depends. I mean, in all scholarly work, we have to define the point of origin where the definition itself arises from, right? Now, if you take a Eurocentric definition, and I was talking to this young lady before our session began on international relations. Well, international relations as an academic theory really was born out of America's need to propagate its own ideas of foreign policy around the world. I mean, you talk to people like John Mersheimer, and they will openly tell you that, right? Now, who created the word religion? And Sachin used the word lexicon. Well, who created that lexicon? We have to then go into who created that lexicon and why. And why should I, if I have to turn the gaze, as Edward Said told us to, if I were to turn the gaze, I mean, I might want to turn the gaze at Edward Said also, but that's a different story. We'll go into that story another time. But if I turn the gaze, then why should I accept the parameters of the definition and the lexicon created by someone else? Now, if I call it not a religion, and I mean, I'm happy to accept that it's not a religion. It makes no difference to me as a Hindu. But I'm saying in any intellectual debate, if I accept that it's not a religious tradition, then the points of debate then gets unsettled and there is no conversation to be had. So I am very happy to say that, well, if you define it in an Eurocentric way, it's not a religion. But if you want to debate religions, I'm happy to debate religion with you. It's not a cop-out. My only point is it shouldn't be seen as a cop-out. I'm not exiting. This is not my escape route from the debate in religion, in theology, right? I'm only saying if you take this lexicon, then this lexicon has to be turned on its head. Because then I will argue, I mean, it's like formal dressing, right? I mean, we were taught formal dressing means a suit. But who says formal dressing only means a suit? Who says the dhoti is not a formal wear, right? If you define formal dressing as a suit, then using that definition, this is not formal wear.
Okay,
So therefore, I would argue that Hinduism is as much of a religion as any other, and of course you could choose. It's an open source religion.
Okay.
We'll come to what an open source religion next time.
Okay, so
next time the mic comes to me, not next time in general.
So I think you've brought up 2 points there. One is that we have to clearly define our lexicon and the arena within which we are having this manthan. But I think the nuance that you picked up is we will not shy away from that manthan, and that manthan is essential. I'd like to bring Acharya Vidyabhaskarji into this. In terms of scripture, have you found that a lot of the lexicon and exploration comes from a Eurocentric point of view?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with Sachinji's description. So from a scriptural point of view, I would go to the extent of saying that before let me say the visitors that came to Bharat at some point in the 8th, 9th century, before that, I would go to the extent of saying even a scholar or an educated person in that period would not have understood what we mean by the word religion today. They wouldn't have understood it simply from the scriptural point of view. They wouldn't have understood it. The word dharma really doesn't work. It's used in so many different senses. One being phenomenon, quality, and then of course duty and order, law, so many different meanings. But the one meaning that doesn't work is what we use the term religion as today. But of course, Hindolji is also right that we can rewrite that. But I would say conventional truth from a scriptural point of view, Vyabhaharika Sakti, conventional truth is something we cannot ignore. So the way that the word religion is used today is of course Eurocentric, and it is infused with certain meanings. And as Sachinji said, those are mostly institutional, hierarchical, dogmatic, specific sets of beliefs that can be listed in a catechism, in a manual. That the manual is probably not longer than 50 pages, And that's a religion. That's what we call religion. And that really doesn't work for what we call Hinduism. So that's why I totally side with Sachin. And
Okay.
nonetheless, and then I'll finish, there is a sense of adhering to a order, a law, in the Rig Veda there is the term ritam. Ritam is the word that is used for dharma primarily. The word dharma also appears in the Rig Veda, but it's in a slightly different sense, more in the sense of truth, in the sense of an ordinance. And the word that we use as dharma today in the Rig Veda is more ritam. And ritam then also means truth, so it's very interesting. It's very closely related to truth. But there is an adherence to that in the Rig Veda. Even the devas, the divinities, adhere to ritam. The rishis adhere to ritam. The humans adhere to ritam. And ritam is that which upholds everything. And dharma later also has the sense of dharana dharma in Shankaracharya's definition. So that which upholds society and also the individual's liberation, path to liberation is dharma. So there is this sense of adhering to something. So it's not entirely off to say that there is a identity at play. But in any case, it's such a deep subject that we can't just cover it, and especially I can't see anybody, I can only see a black screen, so it's very difficult. But I hope I was able to convey something.
Okay, so I'd actually like to bring Hindolji into this one. So it's a two-part question. The first part is a yes or no. So
I'm Bengali, I never give yes or no answer.
Well, now you're tight. So there seems to be agreement that we have to define our lexicon if we're going to have this discussion. Now, in your book, you said you've traveled a lot, and much of the discussion you have in Harvard and so on, you find it odd in terms of public perception of Hinduism. And I mean, the title is Cows, Caste and Curry. So can you tell us a bit about how in those conversations you pick up the differences in lexicon and how you maybe correct them or you address them?
That was first question.
That's question one.
Okay, that's not a yes and no.
No, the first question is you agree that we need to define our lexicon. So that seems to be a point of agreement.
So there are two parts to the answer, if I may say so.
Lovely.
Well, the first part is sure. I mean, as somebody who believes and practices Hinduism, I have no problems. I mean, sure, of course, before there was a look for any definition of who an entity is, you have to have an other. If you're not there, say there's nobody in the world apart from me, right? Then there is no, I don't need to define myself. I always define myself or have a definitive position on who exactly I am based on an other.
On another, okay.
Which is what Vidyabhaskarji was saying. Well, before the invasions happened in India, there was no need to define, well, this is our religion versus something else. Okay. So it was all very well to say it was Sanatan Dharma, and I'm very happy to go with Sanatan Dharma.
So now
the universal law that governs everything. Now someone might say the law also is not the right word, whatever. I just feel that Hindus get trapped into this everlasting quagmire of definition, and we keep drilling down and down, and there's no end, and everybody's confused, and then they go out and then they say, oh, well, I didn't really understand everything, so it must be cow. This is just so for me, I just don't want to cop out. It's a religion. If you want to debate religion, I am happy to debate on the basis of the definitions of religion. I have no problems with that. But if you want to debate philosophy, I'm happy to say that it's much bigger than the Eurocentric definition of religion.
Okay.
And therefore, my point is just this, and every other faith, especially the Abrahamic faiths, have an external locus point of view of truth, right?
Yes.
Truth is outside. Hinduism was the first philosophy which said truth is inside. Okay. Whatever you have to discover lies within you. Aham Brahmasmi. You are the Brahman.
So let's say there's a student on campus and they get asked.
Of course, many millennials actually think they are also God, but that's a different story. Aham Brahmasmi. I had a girlfriend who said, I want to tattoo, Tattva Masi on me, and I was like, this is where our relationship ends, Because if you truly understood Tattva Masi, you would not tattoo it. You would realize how utterly, confined the body is, So tattooing Tattva Masi doesn't really. But who knows? You might want to tattoo that.
So you have a student on campus and they get asked, what do you believe? They say, I'm a Hindu. And let's say it's an open-minded questioner, and they say, what do Hindus believe?
Oh, very simple.
What
My
would you
answer
say
is what I said
succinctly?
earlier. If you believe God is within you, you're a Hindu.
So this internal locus of control.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where do you believe God is? Let's even, I mean, then sometimes to tell the truth, the student, where is the truth? They might think the truth is in, I don't know, some substance we cannot mention on camera, right? I mean, so we don't want to get into the truth. Do you believe there is God? If you believe there is God, where is God? Is it outside you? Well, then perhaps you're not a Hindu. Is it inside you? Then perhaps you're a Hindu.
Let's bring Sachin in. So you mentioned this idea. We'll use the word God for the purposes of this month, and you may redefine it if you wish. You mentioned the idea that you don't have to be theistic or atheistic. And in your paper, you in fact sort of scrapped that whole idea. How would that fit into this conversation where someone says, well, I believe in God, and the Hindu says, well...
Yeah, actually, I think all of us are, both of us are flirting in entering this debate just from a different doorway. But we're entering the debate nevertheless.
Bad level flirting.
Right? And I think the problem becomes that I think that, for example, the idea of simply saying, do you believe in God? Yes. Is it inside or outside? Is really problematic. Because if you're a Quaker, any Quakers in here? Anybody studied Quakerism? Not Quackerism, that's something else. All right? If you ask a Quaker, they will tell you God is within them. But they are not Hindu, right? But they would say they're not Hindu, we would say they're not Hindu,
But
and
some
so on
Christians
and so
would say that they are not Christian.
And some Christians would say,
Yes.
well, no, that's some Christians, who are the Catholics would say Quakers are not Christian,
Yes.
right? But that doesn't make them Hindu.
Yeah, okay.
That doesn't make them Hindu. We're talking about a question of identity, right? Identity. So it can't just be as simplistic as that. Where I do think we should go, though, is there are certain terms, certain words that we need not render into any other language. Bhagwan, like dharma. Dharma need not be rendered into any other language. Need not. Like Bhagwan, need not be rendered into any other language. Atman, need not be rendered into any other language. Why? Atma is not soul. Bhagwan is not God, right? And dharma certainly isn't as simple as law or duty. I mean, that's nonsense. And when I say nonsense, I mean philosophically nonsense, not flippantly. So here, there are certain renderings that I think we should have the confidence to know and then to assert that if you want to discuss philosophy, religion, identity with me, then, and if you want to explore Hindu dharma, then I am going to have to explain to you what dharma is, but you're going to have to be comfortable with the word dharma. You're going to have to become comfortable with the word atma. And no, I'm not going to render it into soul, because soul is something very, very different to the atma. Bhagwan is something very, very different to God. We need not go into that today, but nevertheless, it's, you know.
So
and my problem is,
I'll come back
and my problem in all this is, what's happening, guys, is that I believe we are experiencing ourselves and the universe in an incredibly rich, plural, open-sourced way. But the moment you try and think about your own experience, it collapses into a falsehood. It collapses into gods and atheism and theism. It collapses into souls. It collapses into hierarchies of religion and faith. I mean, these terms do have a place, but they are certainly not conclusive or decisive in the experience that you and I are having in real life. So actually our cognition is limited by these words.
Well, I think we'll come back to that idea of experience. Like, Hindolji, would you like to comment?
Yeah,
and
no,
then,
I completely
and then I'll
agree
bring
with you
Acharya
that
Vidyabhaskarji.
certain words should not be rendered or they do not need to be rendered in any other way. My difficulty is that if all terminology or lexicon in Hinduism is, as some people know, I'm not saying you're arguing this, but as some people say, well, it cannot be translated in anything else. Well, then our entire argument exists in a bubble. That's the danger. At least that's the danger I sometimes see. That nothing that we are saying can be compared or analyzed or analytically experienced or debated in any other way. We are in a bubble of our own, which does not, you have to enter our bubble and that's the only way to experience it. But we can never have a real argument anywhere. That then becomes a bit of a challenge, because then there has to be some common ground for an argument to happen. You know what I mean? Like, if I have to argue with somebody, there has to be some common ground. Because if there's no common ground, there's no argument. So therefore, in order to build some common ground, and when I say the first locus standi is, do you think the idea of God is within you? That is just the starting point. But it is a very important starting point. You have to start somewhere. And you have to, that is certainly, and I take your Quaker point, and there are other, there are parts of Buddhism and Sufism and so on and so forth, sure. But at least that is a very fundamental difference between the main Abrahamic faith and the Indic imagination, the Hindu imagination, sure. That the main Abrahamic faith, as experienced and practiced by most people who follow Abrahamic faith, have a very distinct external locus standi for their idea of God. There is a book, there is an entity called God, which is outside you, and that is the determining point for the truth, right? Yeah. Whereas in the Indic imagination, the Hindu imagination, that locus standi, that point of view is within you. That's a starting point. Then you have to complicate, as we say in academia, and we have to complicate the argument further. That's when you bring in all the points that you're bringing in. Well, then what about Quakerism? What about Sufism? Well, the Sufis also think that, what about Shams? Think about Shams. I mean, he felt that, God was, sort of in a sense around him, and what was the locus standpoint? He was the locus standpoint, and so on and so forth, right? So all of those debates that come into being, I'm just saying, talking about an open source software as opposed to a closed source software is the beginning point. And I say an open source software because, as you know, even today, I mean, Vivekananda could have written a new Upanishad, right?
Yes.
There is no debate about that, right? I mean, Vivekananda could have written no. And even today, if somebody is truly enlightened, they can write their own Upanishad. Yes. There is absolutely no debate about that. And people would accept it. Hindus would accept it. That is a rare phenomenon in theology.
And hence, exactly.
Right? So that is what makes it open source, that you can keep, it's an endless negotiation with the world, with the complexities of the world. It is not a frozen system. It does not freeze at one point and say, well, you have to keep referring back to that frozen point. It says, as the world around you evolves, indeed as the world inside you evolves.
Which makes it a culture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I take your point completely. I just think that we shouldn't, my only point is we shouldn't cop out from any debate. That's all.
Agree.
So let's bring Acharya Vidyabhaskarji in. So Hindolji mentioned a point that Hinduism is fluid and constantly needs to evolve and to some extent be rewritten, and these ideas are certainly not pinned. So question one, is it being rewritten in today, in 2019?
Hindolji, I would, if I may, I would slightly disagree that Swami Vivekananda could not have written another Upanishad. I mean, that would not be the traditional way, and he himself would have never claimed that he would do that. He could have written a commentary on the Upanishads, a new commentary, a new way of explaining, a new tika, a new sub-commentary. The Upanishads are very defined as Shruti, as part of the Vedas. Each Veda has an Upanishad attached to it, Veda Samhita, as I'm sure you know. So I would be very careful in saying that it's open source, that anybody can come and write scripture. I would really disagree with that, because we have a clearly defined scriptural canon, which is the Shruti and the Smritis, and the Itihasas and Puranas, as you know, of course. But we have unlimited commentaries. Of course, there might be some exceptions. In the case of Swaminarayan, they have a Shikshapatri, a new scripture. That's true, but then, of course, the Swaminarayan Sampradaya has itself sometimes questioned whether it is part of the overall Hindudom. But I would say, from a scholarly point of view, we do have a clear definition of what the scriptures are. What we don't have is, we don't have a dogmatic way of saying this is the only meaning or this is the only way to read it. The other point about God being within us, in the beginning you said truth is within you. That was excellent. But then when you use the word God, that becomes difficult, because the message of Jesus, the way Jesus revolutionized Judaism was with this message: the kingdom of God is within you. If you look at the New Testament, that was the message of Jesus. That was the revolutionary message of Jesus. So now, if we say that the definition of Hindu Dharma is that God is within us, and somehow we assume that the others don't have that, that's very naive, because that's the primary message upon which Christianity, early Christianity, began with. Islam is a different story, but Islam, as you all know, has many traditions, Sufi traditions, and also early contemporary traditions that have very similar ideas. So I think it's too simplistic just to say God is within us. If we say the truth, as you said in the beginning, Hindolji, the truth is within us, absolutely, then we're going more in the direction of Hinduism. And I want to finish with just one very important point about terminology. The Buddhist word for ultimate reality is the same word that we in Vedanta use for ultimate reality, Paramartha. So not Paramatma, which of course we also use, but Paramartha, the ultimate reality. Strangely, on our side, it's translated in the 19th century by the early Hindologists. It was translated as Supreme God or Supreme Being, whereas on the Buddhist side, the same word was translated as ultimate reality. So how is that possible? That the exactly same word, basically the same conception of ultimate reality as being always transcendent, as you said, always beyond definition. How is it possible that the same word is translated as God on the one hand by the Victorian Indologists, the Orientalists, but on the Buddhist side it didn't happen. So that shows us terminology is very important. And I would absolutely agree with Sachin Bhai that we have to come away from using a language, meaning English, that is very poor, in many cases very poor, in describing ideas that are well defined in the traditions. It's not as if the Sanskrit traditions or the Hindu traditions or the Buddhist traditions need English to explain themselves.
I'm just going to add.
Investigation, jigyasa, the desire to know, on the other side is important. If somebody wants to understand Hinduism, they have to learn terminology, they have to learn definitions.
I'm just going to ask Hindolji 1 minute.
No, absolutely, and I agree with many of the things you're saying, and I disagree with some things, but the ones I agree with are very simple. Well, absolutely, Vivekananda would have written, if he would have written, he would have considered a commentary. I did not think that a lot of people here would understand the distinction between writing a format of the Upanishad and a commentary. But yes, of course, it's a commentary, absolutely. But sure, I mean, I have no problems with it. But as you point out, there are many sects within Hinduism which actually think that they write their own books, and so therefore that complicates the situation. And then we have to get into many layers of complexities. What does God really mean then? Of course, I would like to call it truth, but does everybody really think of it as truth? Do they prefer a deity? What does a deity mean? So then we're getting into many, many layers of complexity, and this is always a problem in any conversation with Hinduism.
Summarize.
Because the level of conversation has to happen in so many parallel layers that it gets really complicated. Maybe Sachin can sum up.
No. Time. So we'd like to actually open it out for question and answer at this stage. We will give you some time to sort of elaborate on the points that have been brought up. What we'll do, we'll take, is there someone bringing a mic around? We've got one there and one at the back. Anybody else? One over here on the right and one bang in the middle.
In your understanding of the sort of definition of the Hindu tradition.
What play in? What in?
In understanding your definition of the Hindu tradition.
Oh, the definition. Okay. It's a very good question. The only place that, in the scriptures, the only scripture that actually uses the word Hindu is the Bhavishya Purana. And it is, of course, some people say it is a recent work of the 13th century, which it doesn't really matter because it is considered one of the 18 Mahapuranas. And it actually uses the word Hindu. And it's very interesting that it describes a situation where Vikramaditya meets a saintly person and on the border of the Sindhu River, and then Vikramaditya says that whatever is on that side of the river, meaning on the other side of the Sindhu River, is the Mlecha Dharma, the Dharma of the Mlechas. Mlechas means basically non-Aryas, non-Vedic practitioners. And whatever is on this side is the Hindu sthanams. the Sindhu Sthanam, right, based on the river Sindhu. And this is the Arya Dharma. This is the Dharma of the Aryas, of the noble ones. So now we can say this is one indication where the scriptures seem to make a kind of definition. This is what our Dharma is, and that is what their Dharma is. And this is where maybe Hindolji is right, where we could say the word religion could be used as a translation. But apart from this Bhavishya Puran, and as I said, many scholars consider it to be a recent addition to the Quran, which that is not a problem. Apart from this, there is never a definition in the scriptures of this is a person who is a Hindu or an Arya or somebody who is following a particular religious tradition. What we do have is we have endless enumerations of qualities of what a dharmika person is. A righteous person, a person adhering to Dharma, a person who is always truthful, who always follows ahimsa, who is kind, patient, full of compassion for others, for all beings, without exception, who is tolerant, not tolerant, I would say, patient, who is full of forgiveness, generosity, endless enumerations of qualities defining what a dharmika person is. And I think those are the most important for us as Hindus to look at and to make part of our identity. Outside of the scriptures,
if I can ask you,
I'll leave that to Sachin Bhai.
At the back.
Namaste, my name is Prashil. I am a man, unfortunately. So you spoke about we should learn the definitions of dharma and other sorts of words to understand and kind of understand the culture and context. However, would you not say context forms language? So even if you knew the kind of textual definition, the bhakti of Mirabai or the prem of a mother, these are rooted in the contextual stories and the context and values of India and the surrounding narrative around that. And so if you don't have those cultural references and understanding, how are you then to understand those terms and try to understand and accept Hindu experiences and look without kind of devolving into a whole bunch of semantics? Because culture does play a role in understanding. And if we're born in Britain and we don't have those cultural references or ideas, how do we then access Hindu Dharma?
Some of these things, when we talk about the words like Dharma, we are talking about universal experiences, right? Every culture, regardless of wherever it is from, is going to understand the love of a mother, right? There's going to be some depth to that. You're going to get that. The idea behind Sanatan Dharma, is the idea that these are universal truths. It is truth itself, as Vidyabhaskarji mentioned, that this is the exploration. It's a culture that is completely dedicated and completely devoted to exploring truth, right? Of oneself and of the universe, of that which is. So actually, Dharma is accessible, cross-culture, cross-languages. And I certainly wouldn't say that English is incapable of rendering these words. What I am arguing for is that the current rendering is absolutely insufficient and is it's a grotesque interpretation of the words. So I'm not saying that you cannot render Atma into English. You can, but don't translate it into soul, because that's bad. Right? I'm not saying you can't render Bhagwan into English. You could, but it's not going to be a word. It's going to be a whole blooming paragraph. And don't call it God, just because you can't be bothered, right? So my problem is that a lot of the theologians in the 18th century that translated these scriptures into English, and just like you, I'm locked by English. I can only access my own tradition through English. So I need to have better renderings of these words in English so I can access them, right? But that's what we have to do now. That's what I mean when I say we have to take control of the narrative. We have to take control of the lexicon. It means we have to connect what we really experience with what we are saying.
Okay. I think we have one question here at the front.
So
we'll ask them to stick their hands
Hindu
up.
Dharma by logic cannot equal Sanatan Dharma, right? Because Sanatan is that without beginning or end, and Hindu is what we've been defining today as being something that originates from Bharat. The other thing is that we've spoken a lot about owning our own language. Now, Hindu was a term that was given to us, not something that we owned. And so by that, are we failing to change the language in this debate?
Great. Thank you.
Well, actually, the second part of your question is very simple. Increasingly, people do refer to the Sanatana Dharma and not to Hinduism. I mean, that lexicon, while it's a slow change, that change has already begun. You'll see more and more people continuously explain, well, Hinduism was, of course, a term that was given at some point, but actually, of course, the Hindus themselves, and there's a whole academic argument about this. It's called endogeneity, which is essentially forming theories about people who have different theories about themselves, right? I mean, anybody who's done academic will know. So then the Hindus never call themselves Hindus, right? I mean, they call themselves Sanatana Dharmis or whatever, right? So that is already changing. The first part of your question that, well, Hindu Dharma is not Sanatana Dharma because we call it Hindu Dharma, this is where things begin to get complicated and we confuse everybody, especially the young people, and then they don't have an answer. I think these are just academic, hair splitting which we can go into infinitely, right? And I think we have to broad base at least some basics. And I think in any public debate, in the public sphere, and I want to put this to all of you, in the public sphere when a debate happens, it has to happen in broad parameters. It cannot happen at the level of an academic paper. It's not possible. Whereas in our debates, everything goes down to 18 citations to every reference and an academic paper. That's not how you can have a debate in a public sphere. So we have to agree on some basics. We have to begin somewhere. Because yes, it is true that Hinduism is infinitely complex and wonderful and rich. But we have to have some basic parameters with which we to begin the debate. Because if we get trapped into these kind of hair splitting, we will never even begin the debate. I am urging all of you to at least begin the debate with some parameters.
I think if everyone shows their hands, who wants to ask a question?
May I make a comment?
Yes, please, keep it brief.
Why is it that the questioner assumes that the word Hindu was given by outsiders? Hindu, as you probably know, is just a mispronunciation, a Persian pronunciation of the word Sindhu. And this too, by the ancient Persians, whom we could actually claim are the cousins of the Vedic age. So the Zoroastrian Persians have almost the same religious, philosophical traditions as the Vedic peoples had. So we could even argue to some extent that they are Hindu in a wider sense, and it is their pronunciation of the word Sindhu. The same way that the Persians pronounce Sapta as Hafta, because the S is pronounced as Hafta. So in Hindi today we say Hafta because of Persians, and this is mean Sapta in Sanskrit. So the word Sindhu is of utmost importance in the Rig Veda. This might come as a surprise to some, that the river Sindhu is more important in the Rig Veda than the river Ganga. Really, it is. And I'll just give you one quote here. This is the first mantra, Sukta 75, verse 1. The rivers have come forward, 7. Sindhu in might surpasses all the streams that flow. So this shows you, and then one more, if I may. Sindhu's roar is lifted up to heaven above the earth. He puts forth endless power with a flash of light. Like floods of rain that fall in thunder from the cloud, so Sindhu rushes forth with infinite power. So this gives you a sense of how the river was venerated, not just as a physical river, but as something transcendent, something that moves forward. So now that we define the region beyond that river as that of our Dharma, why would we say that the name was given by outsiders? I completely disagree with that. Thank you.
So if you just raise your hands if you had a question again. So there's one here and one at the back. So just before you ask them, if I can ask you all to take out your phones again and jump onto Slido. Done. Okay, fine. So we'll have 2 last questions and then we'll show our
Young
results.
lady there.
So we've got this one here.
Go ahead.
Hi. So my question is
If everyone can just listen, thank you.
my question's related to how you think culture plays in with religion, and so obviously you briefly touched on something to do with culture. So I just wanted to know, how far do you think it's fair to say Hinduism is more to do with like culture as opposed to being as you mentioned, like a defined religion?
And who are you directing it?
I don't really mind.
So can I just render your question as you're saying, what's the difference between religion and culture, and to what extent is the Hindu tradition culture? Is that what you're asking? Fine. So a culture is what? A culture is a umbrella term which basically sums up the values of a people. Those values are derived from the experiences that collective group of people have. So, for example, we have a common culture in Britain because each of us experiences the weather in a similar way. That weather shapes some of our values, right? So inevitably we end up having a cultural similarity, which is going to be different to somebody living in Delhi, right? And so on and so forth. So culture is a set of values that we all agree to. We all nod our heads and say, yeah, I experience the same thing. I experience myself in that environment in that way, and we end up creating values out of that. That's culture. So my argument is that Hindu tradition is a culture. Therefore, that culture has a common geography, a common historical narrative. It has certain scriptural play at it. It has certain teachers. It has certain arts, music, dance, drama, the theatrical, all of that is a part of culture because it shapes your values. It shapes what you believe to be right, wrong, good, bad, moral, immoral. All those things come out of it, right? That's culture. A religion, as I defined it, as the world would define it out there in the world we live in, which is that it is an institutionalized belief system with a hierarchy in some sense, whichever shape it might be, right? Which is the exploration of the metaphysical, meta-ethical, whatever it might be. But ultimately, it's an institutionalized belief system. So that's the difference between a religion and a culture. So Hindu culture has many religions within it. And my argument is that Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, and all these Shaivitism, Swaminarayanism, these are all Hindu religions. They're all Hindu religions.
Okay, last question.
Hindolji,
there you go. Direct.
An earlier definition of Hindu was a set of quote-unquote beliefs that come out of Bharat, right? But we are now living in a time where there are certain quote-unquote, again, faiths that are coming out of Bharat that are starting to reject any association with the term Hindu. How do we go about re-engaging these sects and, or more broadly, must we engage these sects that are now starting to reject any association with Hindus?
Yeah, I was just saying this to Sachin, that look, I mean, if you define everything to a geography, it becomes complex because as Vidyabhaskarji himself was saying, that look, at the end of the day, we might say that, I mean, a lot of people, scholars would say there are many commonalities between the Atharva Veda and Zendavesta. Right? So the Zoroastrian religion and the Hindu religion, so to speak, have many commonalities. But clearly the Zoroastrians were not in the geographic definition that we describe as Bharat, right? So already you have somebody else who had similar ideas somewhere else in the world, right? So therefore, to me at least, and I can only give you my answer, number one, you should always have a dialogue. Because if you don't debate anything in the public sphere, then you have escaped, remember. You have not defended yourself. You have escaped. A lot of people think, oh, we don't need to talk to them. That's a mistake. Because if you don't arrive at the public sphere to take your rightful position, then somebody else will take your position. So you have to have that debate. That's very important. So whoever it is, whatever it is, a debate must happen. That's number one. Number two, the geography is very important because remember Diana Ek, for instance, defined, that in a sense, the idea of Hinduism, and I'm using the word Hinduism again, for common understanding, in a sense was derived from the footsteps of pilgrims, right? That's why you see many of Hinduism's great preachers always traversed the length and breadth of the country because they went from dham, to pilgrimage, right? So in that sense, we must, I think it's very important, what has been forgotten in Hinduism is the experiential part of it. That people have forgotten how to experience it themselves. And I think it's really time, I wrote Being Hindu so that a whole new generation, in a sense, at least gets a starting point. Because our starting point cannot be, we can't define anything, everything is too complicated. First, spend 18 years learning Sanskrit. Sanskrit is very important. Please go back and see, I write every day saying it's the greatest mistake of India not to teach its students Sanskrit. It's a great mistake. But we cannot tell people you cannot access us at all unless you fulfill a set of extremely difficult preconditions. We have to give them an experiential starting point, right? We have to give them an experiential starting point. We have to begin somewhere. And my idea, even to come to these talks, is to give people a starting point. Let's begin the conversation. Let's begin the conversation somewhere. And let me end by saying, since we're concluding, I am proud to be a Hindu. And the greatest tragedy of Hinduism is that its liberalism, its open-mindedness, its open-sourcedness is seen as a weakness. And it's the only, weirdly, it's the only place where we have defined openness to be a weakness. Everywhere else, whether it's in politics, whether it's anywhere else, sociologically, we talk about openness as a great strength. How is it that we have defined the openness of Hinduism as a weakness? To me, it is not a weakness. It's a great strength. In a world where people are blocking each other into silos, it's a great strength. It's about us to explain that strength and to, more importantly, enjoy that strength. I want to conclude. Somebody asked me in America, I was giving a talk, that the Dalai Lama says, what is Buddhism? Buddhism is compassion. So what is Hinduism then, in a word? Well, I said Hinduism is joy. Because remember, Hinduism said, Sat Chit Anandam. The final idea is ultimate bliss. We've forgotten that people ought to be feeling joyful to be Hindu. And my effort at least to explain that you should feel that joy.
We do have time for one more question. Yeah. Sorry, last question, this one.
Hi, so my question was to you. So what are your reasons for associating Jainism with Hinduism, given the numerous factors that differentiate the two significantly, such as our pilgrimages, the deities we worship, our scriptures, and just our history in general?
What do you know about the scriptures?
Personally, I'm not...
What do you know about that history?
Personally, I'm not that religious.
What do you know about those pilgrimages?
The fact that they are in very different sites, and just the way that our priests worship and the way that they are, it's just very different to the actual Hindu culture that I've experienced in other parts of India.
Have you ever studied anything to do with Mahavir, Jain philosophy, any of the Jain darshanas? Have you actually studied it? Be careful who's up there.
I am a Jain. I am a Jain personally, and as a child, yes, I did study a lot of it. But right now, I've forgotten things as I've grown up. But yeah.
So here's my argument, and I'm happy to debate this with anybody. And I want to know, and I challenge anybody to sit down with me, and I'm happy to spend hours with you. Convince me that Jain philosophy, Jain ethics, Jain culture, Jain values are anything different to the wider Hindu culture. And I promise you, you will not find any real difference at all. In fact, let me go one step further. I would say that the wider Hindu culture has absorbed the Jain values. Where do you think vegetarianism comes from? It comes from the Jain religion, which then the Hindu culture absorbed as a high ideal, right? So many elements of the Jain philosophy has now been absorbed by the wider tradition in so many ways. It goes back to this open source narrative, right? That the best ideas get absorbed by everybody, right? Same thing I would argue with Buddhism. And in the paper I argue at some length about why a Jain tradition and Buddhist tradition and the Sikh tradition, they're all religions within the wider Hindu culture because they share the exact same underlying philosophy, language, tradition. What differentiates them? It's the religious aspect, worship. But who said that Hindu identity is about worship? Certainly nobody else has done except Christian theologians. And that's because they had to understand this wide plethora, a culture, when they came to India and thought, well, how do we understand this? In the only framework they knew, which is the religious framework. So, and it was of course in their political interest to ensure that Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists, Shaivites, Vaishnavites, they all believe that they are somehow different. They're not. The underlying philosophy, the underlying tradition are exactly the same. We can even talk about the endogamy of Jains and Hindus as being
Gonna have to ask you to summarize.
Absolutely the same. So I would just say that, you know, unless you can convince me otherwise, because I'm quite sure I can convince you, I just don't buy it. And I challenge anybody to read the paper and then please contact me if you think I've got something wrong. I'm happy to learn.
0 minutes, lovely. So we'll just finish 5 minutes each, your concluding statement, and the one idea that you would like our audience to take away. So we'll start with Acharya Vidyabhaskar, 5 minutes.
So yes, and just continuing on from what Sachinji said, in fact, the divide between what we call now the Hindu Dharma and Jain and Buddhist Dharma is very young. It's probably not older than the 8th century. Before the 8th century, there were always discussions among the different schools of thought. Who are the Astikas and who are the Nastikas? Astikas are those who affirm something as positive, as yes, there is a deity or there is the Vedas. The Nastikas are those who say there isn't. But this definition is that of the Brahmanical communities. The Jains said that we are the Nastikas, and the Buddhists said that we are the Nastikas, and they are the Astikas, right? So it's this discussion was something about doctrine. How should we define correct perception? Things that you today in modern society would consider trivial. It's about such things that these divides began, and probably historians say that probably these divides emerged primarily because the Buddhists and the Jains received support from kings, the Balas, up to a certain point, and then when the invasions happened, all that fell away, and then the Brahmanical communities, which were more widespread, kind of wrote victor's history. So that's why then, the Buddhists are Nastikas, the Jains are Nastikas. That's where these narratives emerged. But these are very young narratives. Jainism and Buddhism are much, much older than the 8th century. So before that, they would have been considered as part of the wider Dharma society, and the arguments would have simply been about how to correctly understand that Dharma. So Sachinji is absolutely right that Jains and Buddhists would have been considered as part of the wider Hindu Dharma before the 8th, 9th century, and these are very young developments, and so I think we can just go back to pre-8th century thinking and consider all of it to be Dharma. As my last point, I really agree with Hindolji about the experience part, that it doesn't make sense to talk about identity merely on an intellectual level, merely on an academic level, or even on a populist level. We have to go back to experiencing what Dharma means. And one of the best ways to do that is really to go back to Bharat. I agree that Dharma can be lived everywhere, but if you go back to Bharat and if you visit temples, if you visit saintly personalities, scholarly personalities, meditative personalities, and you interact with them and you taste the Dharma rasa, this is called in the scriptures. And in fact, there is a Buddhist Pali text that says, Dhamma raso sabba raso jinati, in Pali, which means that the taste of Dharma triumphs over all other tastes. So if we go back to Bharat and we taste the Dharma and experience the Dharma, look within, into our own heart, into our own nature, our true nature, which is one of the best ways of translating Atma. Swarupa is one of the terms that Shankaracharya translates Atma as our own true nature. If we look within, discover our own true nature, even if it's only a glimpse, then we taste that which the rishis tasted. And then we are really in the continuity of Hindu Dharma from time immemorial, from the time when it was Sanatana, eternal.
My closing remarks would have to be something to the effect that I would say the Hindu identity in the 21st century is for us to take control of and for us to build and refine, right? And it has to be coherent to the richness and the experience that you are having in the day-to-day life, right? To what extent and for how long will you be expressing your own reality through the language which doesn't fit it? How do you explain to somebody? Like in my own house, I am, as Vidyabhaskarji will say, I'm a closet Buddhist.
Yes.
Yeah. So we always have these debates, and he calls me a closet Buddhist.
So is this your coming out?
This is my coming out, right? Right? But I'm Hindu. Shortly he'll say, yeah, but you're still a closet Buddhist. Fine. See, I'm okay with that, and he's okay with that, and he's okay with that, and he'll be okay with that, right? So my own mother practices more Jain philosophy than anything else, but she's Hindu completely, right?
Maybe they're not convinced.
No, that's fine. But when I went to Punjab, I saw families where the eldest boy became Sikh. Not out of conversion, but that's what Hindu families do and did for hundreds of years, where the oldest would become a Sikh. Sikh meant something. We won't go into that now, but my point is, I think there's a couple of things. One is I challenge you to study. I challenge you to actually bother to go into these things. Number one. Number two is I think we have to take control of the narrative. And again, we have to challenge the political narrative that is going on in our country. There is a politicization of identity going on, and it's not healthy. And the fact that the Hindu society as a whole is a very plural society is something that we should confidently take forward in the 21st century. I'll give you an example. In any temple anywhere in the UK, you can most certainly have a picture of Jesus Christ in temple, and many temples do, right? I want you to challenge any minister, any priest, anywhere, any imam, and say, can you on Diwali for one day have the murti of Krishna in your church? Can you have the murti of Krishna in your mosque? The answer will be no. Not no because of some other, it's just simply their theological religious beliefs. It is not a plural theology. I can say that openly. It is a theology that is not plural. It's not meant to be plural. And therefore, identity politics gets involved in it. Here is the opposite. This is a plural society. And the world, I will argue, needs more pluralism than identity politics. So I would urge you to go and explore your own reality as you have it, but then learn to narrate it on your own terms. Thank you.
Okay, so instead of further confusing you philosophically now, bring in new concepts, let me in the 5 minutes that I have take off from what both the Acharya and Sachin has said to give you two things that have actually worked for me as a Hindu. Because I truly believe all we can really share is something that we have experienced. If I have not experienced something, what will I share with you, right? Two things have consistently given me strength from the Hindu tradition I want to share with you. One is the idea of what does the Gayatri Mantra really mean? Millions of Hindus around the world say the Gayatri Mantra. I mentioned this in my book, Being Hindu, and I want to share this with you for those who have not read it. Gayatri Mantra is a unique mantra in many ways, not just because it's a great religious mantra, but also because as an idea, it's a very interesting idea to me. Because if you think about it, what is the Gayatri Mantra really asking you to do? It is not asking, you can say God, you can say higher entity, whatever. It is not asking, usually what does prayer ask for, prayers ask for? They ask for protection, they ask for wealth, they ask for well-being, they ask exam mein pass kara do, right? This is what we usually have as prayers. At the very least, protection. That some form of protection should be given to me. This is the usual tenor of a prayer. The Gayatri Mantra is really unique because what is it asking you to ask for? It is asking you to ask for illumination. What does illumination mean? Give us the ability to see things as they really are. And this theme is repeated again in the Mahabharata. This theme is repeated again, and we don't have time to go into that. This theme of helping you to see things for what they really are is a great and powerful thing. If you contemplate about what this really means, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the other thing that has really spoken to me is, of course, those 3 verses. Asatoma sadgamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mrityoma amritangamaya. If you think about it, of course it says lead me from darkness to, from untruth to truth, and so on and so forth. But the last line is very important. Because if you look at the human condition, one of our greatest problems is the fear of death. Think about it. If you really think about it, so many things you will be doing, or you are perhaps already doing, because you're afraid that you will die. This fear of death is consistent in our human existence. And the last line of those 3 shlokas is infinitely powerful to me, because here is a philosophical tradition that is teaching you not only to be not afraid of death, but to accept your inherent immortality. What could be more powerful than that? If any philosophy can help you shed the fear of death, what would you call that philosophy but excitingly powerful? And Hinduism worked for me, has worked for me, works for me every day of my life, because these lessons speak to me directly in my day-to-day life. Because there's no point telling you about esoteric things that will, you should contemplate and, research papers you will write. I think these things have worked for me in my day-to-day life, and I hope they will work for you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to do a dangerous thing and hang the mic back to you. For a Parthian shot, you have 30 seconds. 1 shot.
Well, the parting shot really is that Hindu philosophy is the only philosophy that consistently talks about love. And since we're in a college, I'm sure that's an important theme. And since we're in a college which also has provided us red-colored seats, I'm sure it's an important theme. I think the idea of romance is a very important idea in theology and religion. And I think that's my parting shot.
Based in Hinduism.
Based on Hinduism. I think I rejoice in Hinduism, and Holi is coming, of course. I rejoice in Hinduism because it talks so much about the idea of love. And I think that's an important lesson to learn.
That's wonderful.
Your parting shot. No, I don't get that. No.
Thank you so much to our panel. Amazing discussion. Thank you for being a lovely audience. I can only recommend that you do dig into this. I mean, Hindolji's book is wonderfully sarcastic and explores this topic beautifully, with a great emphasis on our own responsibility as an individual to explore, which I think has been highlighted this evening. And also what's repeatedly been highlighted is the lack of fear and willingness to churn and manthan these things out. So I think you'll have a clear idea of what Vichaar Manthan is trying to do. And also this paper, which, whilst not as sarcastic, is still a great start if you do want to explore this topic further. Thank you very much. I'll now hand it back to our wonderful hosts. Just before we have our concluding remarks, you all very kindly agreed to participate in the questions that we did. So, Bhavyaji, our wonderful technical consultant, is going to throw them up for you. So, did anyone change their idea? Who changed their idea?
So on the left we can see, can non-Indians be Hindu? At first 99% said yes, 1% said no. Afterwards, There was a drop, 96% said yes, 1% said no, and 3% said I don't know, so I assume we confused people there. The second question, religions rooted in India are Hindu. 45% said yes, 55% said no before the talk. After the talk, we can see it's been flipped. 64% said yes, and 36% no. The last question that was posed is it correct to identify Hindu as a religious identity? Again, before the talk, 39% of you said yes, 54% of you said no, and 7% of you were confused. Yeah, so after the talk, 43% said yes, so more of you agreed. 54% said no, and as you said, confused has gone down, so I guess that's good.
I think that's our victory.
The lack of confusion. 3%. The slight reduction in confusion. So, yeah, again, thank you so much for a wonderful evening.
We came in today with trying to understand, what does it mean to be Hindu? How can we grasp this narrative? And how can we shape the world around us? And I don't know about you guys, but I, for one, am immensely fortunate with the three speakers who have given us a journey of reflection, a journey to deepen our understanding, and definitely a lot of food for thought. The energy and engagement in this room has been inspiring. And it shows us, the youth, that there is so much potential to unlock in future events, debating similar and different issues that affect us, just like this one. This event would not have been possible without the collective efforts of many people. And I'd like to start off by thanking our 4 hosting chapters and the key members. Samyak from King's College London. Bhavya from Queen Mary, who has also been fantastic on our AV. Vishnu from Imperial College London. And Ranjana from London School of Economics. And these 4 key members came together, like Drishti mentioned a few months ago, with the thirst to bring something like this to life, so that youth like us today can have an opportunity to broaden our perspective. I'd like to thank Ravi Ji Lakhani and the Vichaar Manthan team for working with us through this journey and for seamlessly moderating this session this evening. And I would like to thank our 3 expert witnesses, Dr. Sachinji Nandha, Sengupta, and Acharya Vidyabhaskarji, who have taken us on this incredible journey tonight. Tonight, we debated so many definitions. We explored concepts and words like Bhagavan. And one of our speakers, Acharya Vidyabhaskarji, has actually explored some of these words, some of these Sanskrit words that we use innately in our day-to-day life. In the initiative, the National Hindu Students Forum Initiative, Sanskrit Word of the Month. So please do check them out on our YouTube channel. We do post monthly videos, and we have our next Sanskrit word coming up very soon. And we never know, it might be a word that we debated and discussed this evening. Finally, I'd like to thank King's Venues for giving us this beautiful venue with a view of the London skyline as we started off this evening. And we hope that this would be the start of many interesting locations, issues, and debates. We have come to the end of the event, but we've just started the journey together. A journey to explore, experience, and be inspired. Before we part our separate ways, I'd like to invite Vipasha Surange, our National Sanskar Coordinator, to share her ending thoughts.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you've had a very enjoyable evening. I'm going to just share one thought with you. The attraction of community is especially keen when there are elements of social exclusion or community collapse, whether or not accompanied by economic deprivation. It's a sense of purpose that most readily propels action and sacrifice. So I came across this thought when I was doing reading for a module for an exam last year. And upon pondering this sentiment, this quote by a scholar, it opens up one's eyes to the importance of seeking and finding an identity. This sense of yearning for a purpose, for a group in which you feel at home, is an incredibly salient concept, especially for the youth of today. When you find an identity, a purpose, a home, your inner potential is immediately unlocked. So, find an identity, a community, a purpose that imparts the correct values, beliefs, and principles to you. A force that does good in the world by bringing the best out of people. So, this is the end of our event. I hope you've had a great time. I hope you have taken many concepts away, probably have more questions than before, but that's a good thing. And yeah, I hope you all have a very safe journey home. Thank you all for attending.